33-year-old male found dead a few days ago. Someone amongst them is our killer.
"10 seconds can change your life forever. An idyllic existence shattered in a flash. A mysterious death? Or is it cold-blooded murder? Only forensics can tell. Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. The story begins 12 years ago in Gander, Newfoundland. In Gander's short history, the number of homicide trials had been 0. In 1988, the count went up to 1. It's nearly midnight on August 15th as a siren shatters the silence of a small community. An ambulance attendant rushes in to find Brenda Dalton unconscious on the floor. Her husband Ronald begs him to make her breathe. The attendant proceeds with CPR. Brenda is rushed to the hospital still unconscious. Ronald Dalton arrives to see his wife wheeled into the emergency room. While time slows down for those waiting the outcome of a medical emergency, in the ER, there is never enough time.
One thing's predictable in emergency medicine is that things are unpredictable.
In order to make Brenda breathe, a procedure known as intubation is performed. A breathing tube is inserted into the throat, passing the larynx to pump oxygen into the lungs.
Every second in which an individual is not receiving adequate oxygen delivery is a second in which their cells are dying. There's no question it's an incredibly anxiety-producing procedure. In the waiting room, they've already had clues that something bad is going on. On the other side of the doors, everybody's doing their best with the goal of the best outcome possible. Unfortunately, sometimes that's not the case.
Despite doctors' best efforts, Brenda Dalton is pronounced dead at 1:30 a.m. Her body is moved to the hospital morgue. To help determine the cause of death, the police take photographs of the body. These photos land on the desk of a senior officer at the local police detachment. It is clear to him from the photos that Brenda Dalton has a suspicious number of bruises. Police now seal off the Dalton home as a sudden death scene. Ronald Dalton and his 3 young children must stay at a neighbor's. Police learn that Ronald and Brenda were high school sweethearts. They were about to celebrate their 11th wedding anniversary. The Daltons seemed to be a normal family. While at the Dalton residence, the investigator gets an urgent call from the pathologist who is conducting the autopsy on Brenda Dalton. His preliminary findings suggest Brenda's death is the result of foul play. With this alarming news, the investigator brings Ronald Dalton in for questioning. He asked Ronald about his activities on the night his wife died. Ronald says he worked late at the bank until after 11 p.m. As the branch manager, he was often the last to leave. He says he got home around 11:30. He found his wife on the floor, unconscious. He tried everything to get her to breathe. When she didn't respond, he called for an ambulance. The detective asked Dalton why he waited 25 minutes to call an ambulance. And does he have an insurance policy on his wife? The more pointed the questions become, the further Dalton withdraws. He won't talk without a lawyer. The investigator is called away from the interview. The final autopsy report has come in. The pathologist's report states that Brenda Dalton's death is a homicide, the result of manual strangulation. The report further states that the attack on Brenda Dalton could have left marks on the assailant's hands. But when the investigator demands to see his hands more closely, Ronald Dalton hides them. Ronald Dalton is then arrested for the murder of his wife. The question that will consume police is why? Why would Ronald Dalton murder his wife? The town of Gander is shocked to learn that Ronald Dalton, the local bank manager, has been arrested for the strangulation of his wife. While Dalton awaits his bail hearing, police zero in on a motive. On the surface, Dalton is the very image of the devoted family man. But underneath, police discover that Dalton was a workaholic whose devotion to his job caused friction in his marriage. Then police catch Dalton in a lie. When he was first interviewed, he told police he worked late at the bank until after 11 p.m. But when police talked to the bank cleaner who worked on the night in question, he tells them that Dalton was not at the bank that night. In Ronald Dalton's private office, the police get a break. They find a batch of passionate love letters he received from a woman named Sandra. Police discover that a woman named Sandra McLean worked at the bank until a few weeks ago. The police obtain Ronald Dalton and Sandra McLean's phone records. They learn that Sandra McLean received a number of phone calls from Ronald Dalton. The last one was made just hours before Brenda died. Police bring Ms. McLean in for questioning. She admits to police that she and Ronald had been attracted to one another for some time, but didn't act on it until the night of her going away party at the bank. She insists that although she and Ronald talked on the phone hours before Brenda's death, it was simply as friends. She says as far as she knows, neither of their spouses knew of the affair. But the police don't rule out anything. Did Brenda confront Ronald about the affair? Could this be the motive for killing her? Almost 2 weeks after his arrest, Ronald Dalton is finally released on bail. He is fired from the bank and shunned by many in the community. Police watch Ronald Dalton's every move. They've already disproved his alibi for the night his wife died. Now they hope his guilty conscience will make him break down and confess. But if anything, he appears unemotional. As the trial approaches, Dalton's children are sent to live with his sister. Ronald Dalton remains an enigma to the police. Accused of murder, he maintains he's innocent, yet he never presents a defense. At trial, Dalton admits he lied to the police about being at the bank. He now says he was home with his wife all evening. He was there with her when she began to choke on some dried cereal. He did everything he could do to help her. Choked on dried cereal. This is a major surprise to everyone in the courtroom, including some members of Brenda's family. To support Dalton's claim, his lawyer brings in a forensic pathologist who states that Brenda Dalton did not die of strangulation, but the pathologist cannot offer an explanation as to how Brenda died. The prosecution reminds the jury that Dalton lied during the investigation, but the autopsy report does not lie. The pathologist who conducted the autopsy on Brenda Dalton clearly states there was evidence of right-handed manual strangulation with asphyxia, bruising of tissue on the right side of the larynx, and evidence of blunt force trauma to the head and both arms. This is the picture the prosecution paints to the jury of how Brenda died. After 1 day of deliberation, the jury returns with a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. Ronald Dalton is sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 10 years. But his story is far from over. By 1997, Ronald Dalton has spent nearly 9 years behind bars for his wife's murder. His 3 children have been raised by his sister. Throughout his incarceration, Ronald Dalton has maintained his innocence. After failing for years to find a lawyer to take on his appeal, Ronald Dalton's file finally lands on the desk of a well-known attorney, Jerome Kennedy.
I said, I'm going to find out what happened here. Because if the truth is that Mr. Dalton is innocent, then the truth can only benefit him.
When Kennedy meets Dalton for the first time, Dalton says he wrote a 100-page letter before his first trial about the truth of how Brenda really died. But the lawyer at his first trial never even submitted it. Kennedy knows that to get Dalton a retrial, he'll need forensic evidence to counteract the autopsy report that stated she was strangled. He also orders a psychological evaluation to explain Dalton's behavior after his wife's death and why he lied. In order to support an application for retrial, Kennedy sends the autopsy report to 8 eminent pathologists, including Rex Ferris.
What I found most striking was the real absence of any evidence of the type of injury associated with strangulation. The bruises were well documented and their location was accurately documented, and it was in fact the precision with which he did that documentation that allowed one to say with confidence that in fact it was not a strangulation.
But if Brenda wasn't strangled, where did the internal bruises come from? Experts suggest that they were the result of an endotracheal intubation. Though not involved in this case, Dr. George Kovac explains what can go wrong in this problematic procedure.
When you think about it, we're placing this metal, rigid structure into the mouth in search of the trachea. And in manipulating the tip of this, one can cause soft tissue injury. And it's not uncommon in emergency intubations to pull this laryngoscope blade out and see blood on the tip.
As to the other bruises on Brenda's body, which the original pathologist said were from a violent assault, Rex Ferris attributes to resuscitative efforts.
These diagrams show the pattern distribution of some of the marks on the face. The distribution of these is very typical of the type of injury that you see in attempted resuscitation, particularly if it's being conducted in a sort of situation of panic and difficulties, as it happened in this particular case.
Then Kennedy learns from forensic psychologist John Arrowwood's report that Ronald Dalton had been suffering from acute stress disorder at the time of his wife's death.
It's my opinion that he was essentially in a state of panic, and when questioned by ambulance personnel, basically what happened here, he said, "I wasn't home, I found her on the ground." And he was, subsequent to that, he said that he was in fact afraid that perhaps the affair that he had been having previously might come to light, and of course he didn't want that to come to light. And it's certainly my opinion that he really didn't give it any thought at all. It was basically a knee-jerk reaction.
Acute stress disorder often makes people act uncharacteristically.
If different observers observed Mr. Dalton at different times, they might very well see what appeared to be very contradictory states. And in fact, that's precisely what we would expect to see from somebody suffering acute stress disorder.
The day of the new trial arrives. For Ronald Dalton, this trial will either exonerate him or put him away for life. The stakes are also high for the prosecution. If Ronald Dalton wins, the prosecution will have to acknowledge they convicted an innocent man. Ronald Dalton tells the story of Brenda's death as he originally wrote it in his 100-page letter. He tells them the night of Brenda's death, he left the bank at 6 p.m. and made a call to Sandra McLean at 6:30 p.m. The affair was over. When he got home, he put his kids to bed. He then joined his wife in the living room.
About 11:30 or so, she went up to the kitchen and came back down with a little Pyrex glass bowl, had it filled with dry cereal. She gave a little cough at one point in time. And I reached over with my left hand, gave her a little pat on the back. I asked her if she wanted a glass of water. She didn't say anything, so I went up to the kitchen. When I came back, she was on her knees, and she was beat right in the face. That frightened me. She lost consciousness then.
The pathologist for the defense state that the description in Ronald Dalton's 100-page letter matches their interpretation of events. The reason police never found any cereal in the living room after Brenda died was because a helpful neighbor had cleaned it up. Exhibit A, a bowl of cereal. Will the jury believe that this is what caused Brenda Dalton's death? The jury is out for 4 days.
Long 4 days. It was a long 12 years, but the 4 days were quite long as well. The only longer time period out of all of that was that hour and a quarter down at the hospital, 15th of August. That was long.
The jury finally returns with a verdict of not guilty. After 12 years, Ronald Dalton is finally free.
My 6-year-old daughter had graduated kindergarten the year her mother died. I made it by about 2 hours in time for her high school graduation when my trial was over in year 2000. And those are the 12 lost years. You know, you don't get those back. They don't get them back.
Ronald Dalton joins the ranks of people who have woken up from the nightmare of false imprisonment.
I'm not the same person I was in 1988. 10 seconds can change your life forever.
Life is full of so many twists and turns that for anyone to sit there and say, this couldn't be me, then you're living in a dream world. Innocent people get convicted of crimes they didn't commit, even murder. And that's what happened to Ron Dalton.
It's a world of deceit, intrigue, and greed. Second only to drugs as a source of illicit underworld funds. A world where only forensic science can tell the real from the fake. Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Pablo Picasso, perhaps the most famous painter of the 20th century. Each work is an artistic treasure and is worth more than its weight in gold. If it's genuine, that is. Exhibit A, a Picasso. A precious work of art? Or worthless fake? The mystery begins when an art broker offers an etching to a prestigious art gallery. The gallery assistant, Judah Skolnick, is always on the lookout for fine art. But something about this etching stirs her memory.
I said, there's, I don't know, something funny here. And I said, oh yeah, here's the image, all right, but you've got the mirror image. This is not authentic. Someone has done like a photographic or other kind of reproduction, but backwards.
William Welland, the gallery owner, is stunned. Then he panics.
God.
He remembers that only the week before he paid $250,000 for a painting offered by the same broker. At the time, he was delighted to acquire a striking oil painting by Frederick Varley, one of Canada's famed Group of Seven. At the turn of the century, this group of artists captured the stark beauty of the Canadian wilderness. One of their paintings had recently sold at auction for $1.4 million. Could the Varley also be a fake?
He was enraged. He then said, I'm going to call the police. I think there's something wrong here.
Welland's call is handled by Detective Neil Stokes.
At the time, and I must be honest, I didn't know much about art at all, and I was treating it more as just a property crime, a very simple property crime.
But Neil Stokes is about to discover that art crime is like a virus. It can kill the reputation of everyone connected with it. Collections can become worthless. Careers can be ruined. The Varley must be authenticated and quickly. Welland points out that the provenance or label on the back dates the painting to 1914 at the beginning of Varley's career. Detective Stokes is intrigued.
Stokes was just fascinated, even though it wasn't something he knew very much about or had ever come into contact with. He just liked the whole idea of it. And we were thrilled to be helping him to kind of solve this mystery.
Stokes' first step is to contact Interpol, the international police organization. One of their sections investigates stolen and forged works of art.
Art can have a tremendous value. The forgery of art provides you or provides the criminal or people involved in criminal activities with easily accessible cash, which they can use when required. I think it has been mentioned quite often by investigators that there is a close link between art crime, narcotics, and the traffic of arms.
Interpol advises Detective Stokes to have the disputed painting sent to the CCI, the Canadian Conservation Institute in Ottawa. The CCI often works in conjunction with police to fight art fraud and forgery. Stokes begins to search for the source of the forged etching. He brings in the art broker for questioning. Where did she get the Varley and the fake etching? She's only too glad to tell her story. She was contacted by a Frenchman living in Toronto. He told her a hard luck story about needing to sell some family artworks to raise money. To test the veracity of her story, Detective Stokes gets her to call the Frenchman to say she's returning the etching. The Frenchman is furious. He threatens her with violence. Stokes assures her he'll only be steps away the whole time. Once the etching is in the Frenchman's hands, the police will spring their trap. In the meantime, the Canadian Conservation Institute begins its analysis to date the Varley. The CCI scientists can call upon a battery of forensic techniques.
We always start with what we call non-destructive techniques, which means we don't actually touch the painting, we don't remove paint or any material. That includes what we call scientific photography and also radiography.
The CCI uses these techniques to discover any alteration or retouching of a painting, a quick way to help spot a counterfeit.
We have another non-destructive technique, which is called X-ray spectrometry. And that technique gives us information about the chemical elements that are present in the paint.
In the 20th century, patents were obtained for new pigments, and this is most helpful to date a painting. Marie-Claude Courbet zeroes in on the white paint. If it contains titanium, then the Varley cannot have been painted as early as 1914, since titanium white was only developed in 1923. Back in Toronto, the frightened art broker leads Detective Stokes to a flea-bitten hotel in a derelict part of the city. Her mission is simple: drop off the etching. The first part of the plan goes well, but the Frenchman turns nasty. Fortunately, Stokes is there to greet him. Under questioning, the tough guy quickly caves. He claims he's only a little fish, a go-between for the real mastermind who paid him to sell the etching. This is one part of art crime that Neil Stokes knows how to handle without lessons.
The Frenchman was willing to cooperate with us and make contact with the big fish, and told him, okay, I've got the painting back from the appraiser, come and pick it up. Use the little fish to catch the big fish.
The question is, who is the big fish, and will he take the bait? Detective Neil Stokes has been plunged into the world of international art crime. At stake is a Varley painting worth $250,000 and the reputation of renowned gallery owner William Welland. So far, police have nabbed a little fish who tried to play the shark and got caught in a police net. Detective Stokes instructs the Frenchman to set up a meeting with the mastermind. The Frenchman knows his freedom hangs on getting him to leave the hotel with the fake etching. In the end, threatening revenge, the mastermind leaves with the incriminating etching. Detective Stokes quickly moves in and arrests his mark, a man who identifies himself as Piero Bustamante. But Bustamante smoothly claims that this is all a terrible mistake. Under questioning, Bustamante says he's as baffled as the police. The etching a fake? Not possible. The Varley, it's a wonderful painting. If both works of art are fake, then he too is the innocent victim of a vicious fraud. Police don't have enough to hold him, but they continue to delve into Bustamante's past. Stokes gets a new piece to add to the puzzle. Judith Skolnick, the gallery assistant, remembers lending the authentic etching to Bustamante about 3 years ago. He had said he wanted to show it to his lady friend before he bought it, but he returned it the next day. Meanwhile, at the CCI, X-ray spectrometry reveals the presence of titanium in the white paint, which dates the Varley after 1923, 9 years after it was allegedly painted. To confirm her findings, Marie-Claude Courbet will have to take a tiny sample from the painting.
The most challenging aspect really is, I think, the sampling of works of art, because of course we cannot take huge amount of material from original work. So this is quite a critical step in our examination. All the techniques we use, they are specially designed to look at extremely small samples.
Marie-Claude Courbet will study a minute sample of white paint using X-ray diffraction, a technique which produces patterns like fingerprints. Back in Toronto, Neil Stokes obtains a warrant to search Bustamante's home. At his fashionable loft, police find Martine, Bustamante's lady friend, but no Bustamante. They also seize a veritable treasure trove of artworks worth more than $1 million.
We came out with almost 70 to 80 paintings, etchings, all sorts of artwork. We also found a mylar sheath that was used for photo reproductions. So one of the charges was possession of instruments for forgery. So that was a real incriminating piece of evidence.
Stokes suspects that the mylar sheath was used by Bustamante to create the fake etching. Bustamante is charged with theft, attempted fraud, and with possession of instruments of forgery. Despite the evidence, Stokes suspects it will be hard to make the charges stick against Bustamante. But he has a strong ally in William Welland, who is more than willing to teach him about the world of art. At his bail hearing, Bustamante makes an audacious move. He pleads for his liberty.
He told the judges that he needed to go back to Europe to find the artist or the person that sold him these paintings to prove his case, and that he would be vindicated when his day in court came. And much to my chagrin, they gave him bail, and I was actually ordered to give him back all the works of art that I couldn't prove at that time were part of a criminal offense.
While Bustamante is in Europe, the CCI completes its examination of the suspect painting.
In the case of the Varley, we found that famous titanium white. And not only that, but titanium white can exist in two different crystalline forms. One was developed in 1923, the other one in 1938. And the one we found was the one developed in 1938. So we're very far from the 1914. That was supposed to be the date of the Varley.
The Varley is a fake. It is Detective Stokes who delivers the CCI's devastating findings to Welland. It's a crushing blow. He's lost $250,000 and his reputation is tarnished.
I'm sure underneath there was a loss of pride. The money was considerable, but he really felt that this was something that could not be perpetrated on the public.
Bustamante appears to have won the first round, but will his luck hold out against Neil Stokes and William Welland? Detective Neil Stokes is locked in a fierce battle with the suspected mastermind of an art fraud, Piero Bustamante. Free on bail, Bustamante has left for Europe with his companion, Martine. That's when Stokes discovers that Bustamante has already served time for art fraud. And according to Interpol, he is the prime suspect in numerous other international art scams. Then one night, thieves break into a major Ottawa art gallery and steal several valuable artworks. Among them is a print by Pablo Picasso. When Stokes tells Welland about the break-in, Welland explains that the thieves may have a hard time fencing the Picasso. Fine art prints are made in limited editions, and each is numbered as it is printed, making it easy to trace. Back from Europe, Bustamante is spotted walking on Gallery Row. Stokes seizes the opportunity to serve Bustamante with papers to reappear in court on the original fraud charges involving the etching and the fake Varley.
So I went up there to serve him the papers, and like an idiot, he opened the door and let me in. He was very cooperative, acting like we were best friends.
Stokes immediately recognizes the Picasso. He knows he must quickly get a search warrant to recover the print before it disappears back into the art underworld. The next day, Stokes is back at the loft. The Picasso has already disappeared. But the game isn't over yet. Stokes places Bustamante and Martine under arrest. She insists on changing clothes before going to the police station. After Martine slips into the bedroom, Stokes hears the noise of furniture being moved. As soon as she reappears, he searches the room. There, under the rug, is the missing Picasso. But only a forensic examination can prove if it is the stolen print. Once again, Stokes turns to the Canadian Conservation Institute for authentication.
Neil's hypothesis was that that print was genuine. It was an original Picasso print. And he was sure that the number had been changed just to hide the provenance of that print. By looking at the paper through a microscope, high magnification, you could really see that the paper fibers had been disturbed. You could see the motion, the fibers were disrupted. Now, we were able to detect and confirm that a number had been erased.
Stokes' art education has paid off. His theory is correct. The Picasso found at Bustamante's is the one stolen from the Ottawa Gallery. Bustamante is charged with possession of the stolen Picasso. He will also have to face justice on the previous charges of forgery and theft, brought in connection with the counterfeit etching, the fake Varley, and several valuable stolen paintings. Based on the evidence, police detail their allegations about how Bustamante operated. He presented himself as a sophisticated art collector. This gave him access to works of art, some of which he copied. He also acquired works that had been stolen, perhaps even at his orders. Police are also convinced he paid forgers to create counterfeits signed with the names of famous artists. He then found middlemen and innocent dupes who sold the art to unsuspecting victims. And all the time, Piero Bustamante and Martine reveled in the luxury paid for by his criminal activities. But for Bustamante, the game isn't over yet. Before trial, he offers a plea bargain, a reduced sentence in exchange for helping police recover other stolen works of art. He's given the lightest sentence possible, 2 years less a day.
It hurt me to see that the judicial system allowed this ringleader to carry on and gave him such light sentences that he would be released in a short time to get out only to carry on.
For gallery owner Welland, Bustamante's light sentence is a terrible blow. In less than 2 years, the mastermind who ruined him will walk out a free man. Two years later, after a lifetime of selling fine art, William Welland closes his gallery. He organizes one last grand exhibition. He borrows many valuable paintings from other galleries and collections. That night, the back door of the gallery is smashed. Several of the most valuable paintings are stolen. Only weeks before, Piero Bustamante had been released from jail. The sad truth is, in the nefarious world of art crime, the criminals often end up holding most of the aces. Women are being terrorized at knife point on the streets of Toronto. Without a suspect, the forensic evidence is no help to police. Even a major task force can't come up with one solid lead. Police are baffled as the elusive predator slips through their net. Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. What makes a sexual predator tick? Most of us hope we'll never need to know. Sadly, we're not all that lucky. It's 1995 and a day like any other for Sunita Mitra. She takes her usual route home from work, walking from the bus stop through a well-trafficked park in the northwest corner of Toronto. A man behind her calls out, asking if she dropped a $5 bill. Sunita turns to answer him. He pulls out a knife and threatens to use it if she doesn't do as he says. When Sunita gets home, she tells her father she was robbed at knife point in the park. He calls the police to report the robbery. Sunita takes police to a pedestrian tunnel where she says the mugging took place. What they find at the scene makes police wonder if this was more than a robbery. It doesn't take long for Sunita to admit that she had been raped. She was just too embarrassed to tell her father. She says that after her attacker pulled a knife on her, he dragged her into a pedestrian tunnel where he ordered her to take her clothes off. His face was partially hidden by a bandana. Desperate to stop him from raping her, Sunita lied and told him she had gonorrhea. Her deception didn't work. He found a dirty plastic bag on the ground and used it as a condom. The most surreal part of Sunita's story is what happened after the rape. The rapist put the knife away and became strangely solicitous. Suddenly acting like a gentleman, he offered to help her get dressed and walk her home. Sunita couldn't get away fast enough. Sunita's story leads police to their first piece of physical evidence, a plastic bag used as a condom. They bring her to the hospital for an examination. Using a sexual assault kit, doctors are able to retrieve a tiny sample of saliva from Sunita's breast. Police hope to get a DNA profile of the attacker from this or from the plastic bag. They send the evidence to biologist Kim Johnston at the Center of Forensic Sciences.
One of the items that I was asked to look at was a piece of plastic bag which the assailant had used in lieu of a condom, and we were able to find her DNA on it.
But she cannot isolate any other DNA. Johnston focuses next on the microscopic amount of saliva found on Sunita's body. It will take a couple of days to get results back. A random crime by a stranger is going to be a challenge for Detective Michael Barsky, an investigator with the Toronto Police.
Finding a person that's offended sexually against another person is even more difficult, in my opinion, than finding somebody that's committed a homicide. It's difficult because you have to know what type of person you're looking for and where exactly to look.
The evening after Sunita's rape, another woman, Marianne Wilson, takes her usual route home from work through the same park. She hears someone jogging behind her, but instead of running by, he grabs her, pulls a knife, and forces her into the bushes. Mary Ann reports the rape to the Toronto police. She is examined for trace evidence of the rapist. After the exam, police ask Mary Ann if she can identify her assailant. She tells them that he wore a bandana, but she didn't look at his face. She was afraid that he'd hurt her if she knew what he looked like. Her account of the attack is eerily similar to the one they heard only the night before. She tells police that when he was done, he helped her get dressed and asked to walk her home. 2 rapes with similar MOs, 2 days apart in the same city park. It sounds like the same rapist. But investigators don't want to jump to conclusions. Meanwhile, the sexual assault exam on Mary Ann has found traces of semen. The sample is sent for DNA analysis. If the samples from both the attacks match, then police can be sure it was the same man who committed the 2 rapes. It's 1995 and biologists have new DNA technology at their disposal. PCR, preliminary chain reaction.
The big advantages to PCR are a short turnaround time, so you can get results in a couple of days, and also the fact that you could work with much smaller samples, including samples that were at least partly degraded.
After 2 days, Johnston finds that the saliva from Sunita and the semen found on Mary Ann match. Exhibit A, the rapist's DNA. The most accurate identification tool forensic science has. The 2 women were raped by the same man. This guy's attacked twice in 2 days. Given what police know about serial rapists, this is only the beginning of his rampage. Will they be able to find him before he strikes again? Police have a serial rapist on their hands. They also have his DNA, but it's no help. There are no suspects yet, so there's nothing to compare it to. Police take another approach. They call in behavioral profiler Jim Van Allen to help describe the type of rapist who committed these crimes.
Victims were describing him as a young male, late teens, early 20s. He was operating in a very tightly clustered geographic area within a very narrow window of opportunity.
Van Allen uses an offender classification system developed by the FBI. From his first look at the evidence and the victim's statements, he believes this offender is what's called a power reassurance rapist.
This is a rapist who is motivated to reassure himself of his masculinity by exerting his power sexually over a female victim. They tend to use weapons in relation to the crime. They only use the level of violence that's required to gain and maintain control over their victims. They seem to be operating from a fantasy of wanting to be involved in a consensual sexual relationship. We see certain attempts to reassure the victim that she will be okay if she submits to this. We see minor acts of consideration that we don't see in other forms of a rapist.
Van Allen's profile helps police zero in on the type of offender they're looking for. Now they need to get more specific and warn the public.
We don't want the community not to be educated to the fact that this type of offender is out there in this area committing this type of offense.
Police ask the victims to work with a composite artist to come up with a portrait of their attacker. Betty Clark is an artist who works with the Toronto police. She pioneered a computerized system for creating composite images of suspects.
When a witness comes in here, they look at the mugshot rolls. The computer will match the description of the suspect and give them 100 pictures to look at. They'll pick one for the eyebrows, one for the nose, one for the ears, the hairstyle, the face shape, and whatever parts they remember. And we take those photographs, put them together on the computer. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. We don't have mugshots with bandanas on them, so we do have to create something of that sort. Or, as in this case, we just eliminate the lower section of the face. the closer you get to the suspect's final identity. They're crying, they start shaking, and I actually look for that kind of reaction and know that we're getting somewhere.
Even though the composite reveals only part of the attacker's face, police feel the image is good enough to release to the media. The stories all over the news with warnings to women not to walk through the park alone at night. Despite the public campaign, another woman is attacked. But this time, the victim fights back and the rapist flees. The MO fits, a young black man. He's face half covered with a bandana, holding a knife in the same park at the same time of day. Police are sure it's the same attacker, and they're alarmed. Can he be stopped?
For some people, it becomes an overwhelming drive in their life. It's like a video that just keeps repeating in their head. And certain offenders are compelled to try and bring that fantasy into reality. Those tightly clustered offenses in such a narrow window of opportunity suggest that that was the only time that was available for that offender to commit his sexual assaults. Very shortly after 6:40 p.m., he was under some form of restrictions, and I saw this as indicating this offender was a teenager living with a dominant female figure, most likely his mother.
When the news reports the third attack, the public is outraged. Men who live in the neighborhood patrol the area looking for a suspect. The next day, two people call police. They report a black male running in the park near the location of the rapes. They think he looks a lot like the composite. Police approach the man and discover that he's in possession of pepper spray, an illegal substance.
He was arrested for that and brought in for investigation. And during the course of that investigation, everything seemed to fit with him.
His name is Frank Sweeney. He lives in the area of the rapes, and he matches the physical descriptors. He claims he's innocent. Police question Sweeney for hours. He sticks to his story. He tells them he carries pepper spray because he works as a security guard. Police ask him to take a polygraph. He agrees. In spite of his claims of innocence, Sweeney fails the lie detector test. After 10 hours of intensive questioning, he finally confesses. Police announce to the media that they have a suspect in custody, and the city breathes a sigh of relief.
In this type of offense, it's a relief. It's a relief for everybody, for the police investigating it, for the community, when you believe that you have the person in custody.
But after Sweeney meets with his lawyer, he immediately recants his confession, claiming it was coerced. To prove he's innocent, Sweeney volunteers to provide a DNA sample. Once again, biologist Kim Johnston is under pressure to give police quick results.
If it wasn't him, it meant the real rapist was still out there, and the police needed to know that as quickly as possible so they could help protect the women living in the area.
3 days later, the DNA results come back. Kim Johnston informs police that Frank Sweeney's DNA is definitely not a match to the samples taken from the two assaults. Sweeney is not the rapist. The police are surprised and disappointed. Sweeney is released that day. Police announce to the media that they arrested the wrong man. The rapist is still out there. All their warnings to women are back in effect, and their investigation is back to square one. As this sexual predator continues assaulting women, public pressure mounts. Police intensify the investigation, determined to catch him before another woman is victimized. A large task force is deployed to canvass the neighborhood around the park. According to Van Allen's behavioral profile, this is where the rapist is most likely to live. They visit hundreds of homes, hoping someone will recognize the composite. Police are frustrated when the canvassing fails to turn up a single lead. Then 3 weeks after the first attack, in a completely different part of the city, a woman is walking home from the bus stop. A man grabs her from behind, holding a knife to her throat. Fortunately, a neighbor witnesses the attack and shouts to let the woman go. The rapist flees. For police, it's an all too familiar scenario. Only the change in the assault's location is a surprise, and a troubling one at that.
So we have to look at that as the investigators and say, why now does this person go so far east to attack? Is it because of the media attention? Is it because they've moved?
Sometimes we see offenders change their MO or offending activity when certain things happen in their life. There might be a lifestyle change. They might get into a relationship, or they might feel that they've come under scrutiny from the investigative team.
2 weeks later, there's yet another attack, the fifth in 4 weeks. This time, it's back on home territory in the park. Police are no closer to finding the predator. Meanwhile, the tip line has generated hundreds of potential suspects. Police ask some of them for a voluntary DNA sample, but none of them match the rapist's profile. A month goes by, and no more attacks are reported. 6 months later, the rampage seems to have stopped. The case has gone so cold, it might as well be dead. Then police receive a 911 call from a woman reporting an assault. When police arrive, a prostitute named Gabrielle recounts what happened. She got to the house of a new client, a guy named Dwayne Lewis. It's his 18th birthday, and Gabrielle was going to be his birthday present to himself. Gabrielle tells police that when she asked for her fee up front, as she always did, he pulled a knife and demanded sex for free. Her driver was waiting outside, and she managed to signal him with her cell phone. Dwayne Lewis tells police that Gabrielle and her driver are nothing but thieves who had broken into his house. After hearing both versions, police arrest Lewis for assault.
The investigators certainly didn't consider a link to the attacks in the park because it was so different in the geography. One of the lead members of our investigative team read that occurrence the next morning and said, boy, other than the geography, this is our guy.
Lewis is released on bail for the attack on the prostitute, but investigators keep a close eye on him. They find out he's still in high school and lives with his mother near where the rapes had occurred. He fits Van Allen's profile almost to a T. Police believe that Lewis might be the rapist they've been looking for, so they ask him to provide a DNA sample. He seems cooperative, but politely refuses to volunteer his DNA. Police get a search warrant on Lewis's home. What they find in his bedroom blows the case wide open. A journal that reads like a cross between a diary and an appointment book. In it, he's recorded plans for raping women and evading police. They even find maps, which police believe are the actual attack scenes. It's damning evidence, and it allows police to get the DNA warrant they need. 2 days later, biologist Kim Johnson gets the result from the DNA sample. Dwayne Lewis's DNA matches the DNA from the sexual assaults in the park. They've got him dead to rights, and Lewis knows it. He confesses to all of the attacks, including the one on the other side of the city. It turns out he had a part-time job selling door to door. The week of that attack, he was working across town. Dwayne Lewis is charged with 2 rapes and 4 attempted rapes. Finally, the predator is off the street. Dwayne Lewis's journal had given police written evidence that revealed the workings of a twisted mind. The mind of a 17-year-old boy living in a fantasy world. He was convicted in adult court and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Throughout the trial, he continued to believe his fantasy that the rapes were dates and the sex was consensual. He never apologized for his crimes because he had no idea that his acts of violence had changed his victims' lives forever. The stories on Exhibit A are based on true cases. The forensic scientists and investigators are the actual individuals who worked on the cases. The names of the victims are fictitious. The names of the guilty are real.